The noise of Johannesburg was a living thing, a constant, chaotic symphony of minibus taxis, distant sirens, and the hum of a million lives intersecting. But inside Daniel Mokoena's small apartment, the only sound was the rhythmic drip of a leaky tap and the frantic beat of his own anxious heart. Stacks of books leaned against the walls like tired old men. On his laptop screen, a dozen emails sat open, each a variation of the same polite, soul-crushing theme. Thank you for your submission, but he had poured his youth into crafting tales of shadow and fear, stories that explored the darkness that lingered just beyond the veil of the ordinary. Yet the world seemed to want none of it. At 27, the dream of being a writer was curdling into a bitter joke. He was about to close the laptop to finally surrender when his phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with an unknown number from a Cape Town area code. He almost ignored it, but a flicker of foolish hope, the writer's eternal curse, made him answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was like gravel stirred with honey, low, weary, yet possessing an undeniable gravity. Am I speaking with Daniel Mokoena? Yes. Who is this? My name is Adrian Cole. Daniel's breath caught. Adrian Cole. The name was a legend in publishing circles, a phantom, a brilliant, reclusive editor who had launched careers with a single book before vanishing from the public eye years ago. He ran a small, prestigious press from Cape Town, but it was said he hadn't personally signed a new author in a decade. I've read your work, Mr. Mokoena, Cole continued, his voice devoid of pleasantries. The story about the mineshaft ghost echoes in the deep. It was sent to me by an acquaintance. It was rejected, Daniel said, the words tasting like ash. It was, by fools, Cole stated simply. You have a talent for atmosphere. You understand that true horror is not about what you see, but what you feel in the silence that follows. However, your stories lack a certain weight, a foundation, a pause stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. I have a proposition for you. One story. I will pay you enough to change your life, but it must be based on something real, something that has happened. Daniel's mind raced. What do you mean, real? I want you to travel to the Tsitsikama forest, Cole said, the name dropping into the conversation like a stone into a still pond. You've heard the stories, I presume. The girls who walk into the trees and are never seen again. The locals who won't go near it after dark. I want you to go there. I want you to breathe that air, to feel its history, and to write what you find. I don't want fiction, Mr. Mokoena. I want a testimony. The Tsitsikama. Daniel knew the whispers. A place of sublime beauty and deep, unsettling folklore. A place of disappearances that were never solved, just absorbed into the local mythology. It was a horror writer's dream, in his nightmare. Why me? Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because you are hungry, Cole replied, a chilling certainty in his tone. And because you are young enough for the forest to notice you. A hotel has been booked. The funds will be in your account within the hour. The manuscript is to be delivered to my Cape Town office when it is done. Do we have a deal, Mr. Mokoena? Daniel looked around his cramped apartment, at the monument to his failures. This wasn't just an offer. It was a lifeline thrown into a churning sea. He didn't care if it was attached to an anchor. Yes, he said, his voice firm for the first time. We have a deal. 2 days later, the smog and noise of the city were a distant memory, replaced by the salty tang of the Indian Ocean and the overwhelming green of the garden route. The bus had deposited him in a small, sleepy town that clung to the edge of the great forest like a nervous child. He checked into a quaint, slightly damp guest house, run by an elderly woman named Elna, whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen the seasons turn against this ancient backdrop for a lifetime. When she saw the new notebook and pens on his table, she offered a sad, knowing smile. Another writer, eh? They come every few years looking for the ghosts. Just looking for inspiration, Daniel replied, trying to sound casual. Elna topped up his cup of tea, her movements slow and deliberate. Inspiration is one thing, but that forest, it keeps its stories to itself. It's a quiet place. Too quiet. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. You hear the birds in the morning, all around the town, but you stand at the edge of those trees, and it's like the world holds its breath. Nothing. No birds, no insects. Just silence. It's not a peaceful silence, you understand. It's a hungry one. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. Just be sure you're back before the sun goes down. Nothing good happens in that forest in the dark. It doesn't like visitors then. The warning lingered in the air long after she had left. That afternoon, Daniel walked to the edge of the forest. It was exactly as she'd described, a dense, impenetrable wall of giant yellowwoods, ferns, and tangled vines. The cheerful sounds of the town faded behind him until they were gone completely. Before him, there was only the profound, listening silence. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and something else. Something ancient and aware. It felt like standing on the shore of a dark, bottomless ocean. He could feel a pressure in his ears, a weight on his chest, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on him. He felt a primal urge to turn and run back to the guest house, to the comforting normality of Elna and her tea. But then he thought of Adrian Cole's voice, of the money in his account, of the rejection emails. This was his last shot. He couldn't fail. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Daniel Mokoena clutched his notebook, squared his shoulders, and took a step forward. He crossed the invisible threshold, and the canopy of leaves swallowed the sky above him. The world he knew vanished. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, more absolute. It was no longer just quiet, it was the absence of sound, a vacuum waiting to be filled. And in that profound stillness, a singular, terrifying certainty washed over him. He was not alone. The forest was watching. The first few days in the Tsitsikama forest were a lesson in silence. Not the peaceful, birdsong-filled silence of a country morning, but a deep, absorbent quiet that swallowed sound whole. Daniel Mokoena felt it press in on him, a physical weight on his chest. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, seemed to refuse to carry noise. His own footsteps on the mossy ground were muffled, his breath stolen the moment it left his lips. He was a trespasser in a place that had long forgotten how to host guests. He'd set up a small, sturdy tent in a spot he deemed safe, but sleep was a skittish creature that fled from the oppressive darkness. During the day, he'd walk for hours, a notebook clutched in his hand, trying to capture the forest's soul in words. He wrote of the colossal yellowwood trees, their canopies a dense ceiling that starved the forest floor of light. He described the ferns that unfurled in primordial shapes and the fungi that glowed with a faint, sickly luminescence in the deepest shadows. But his words felt hollow, failing to grasp the profound wrongness of the place. It wasn't just quiet, it was watchful. On the fourth day, as the sun began its slow bleed toward the horizon, he pushed through a thicket of tangled branches and stumbled into a place that felt entirely different. It was a clearing, almost perfectly circular, carpeted not with moss but with soft, short grass. Here the light was gentler, a cascade of gold and rose that pooled in the center. The oppressive weight on his chest lifted, replaced by an unnerving sense of peace. In the middle of this strange sanctuary, a young woman sat on a fallen log. She looked up as he emerged, her eyes wide and dark. She wasn't startled. Her stillness was absolute, as if she were a part of the landscape itself. She wore a simple, timeless dress that seemed out of place, and her dark hair was woven into a long braid. But it was the sorrow in her face that held him captive, a quiet, ancient grief that seemed too heavy for her slender shoulders. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Daniel said, his voice sounding rough and loud in the sudden calm. She offered a small, sad smile. "You're not intruding. No one ever comes here." Her voice was soft, a melody that barely disturbed the air. "I'm Daniel." He took a hesitant step forward. "I'm Maya," she replied. That was their first meeting. He stayed until the last vestiges of light had faded, and they spoke of simple things, the color of the sky, the feel of the air. He found himself talking about Johannesburg, about the noise and the rush, and the way he felt invisible within it. She listened with an unnerving intensity, her dark eyes never leaving his. As true darkness fell, she simply stood. "I have to go now," she said, and before he could ask where, she had turned and melted into the shadows of the surrounding trees. He returned the next evening, and the next. It became his ritual. Each day he would endure the suffocating presence of the woods, his heart counting the hours until dusk, when he could retreat to the clearing. To her, a fragile, intimate bond began to weave itself between them in the twilight. He told her of his dreams of being a writer, of the stack of rejection letters that felt like a monument to his failure. He spoke of the publisher's strange offer, this one last chance. "You're writing about this place?" she asked one evening, her gaze drifting toward the darkening canopy. "I'm trying to," he admitted, "but I don't understand it. It feels hungry." A shadow passed over her features. "Some places are," she whispered. "They have memories and appetites." He was falling for her, with the reckless speed of a man who had been lonely for too long. He was drawn to her mystery, yes, but more so to the deep well of sadness within her. He wanted to see her smile, a real smile, not the ghost of one that sometimes touched her lips. He asked about her family, her home, but her answers were always evasive, like smoke. She spoke of being from far away and of waiting for a long time. On the seventh evening, the air was different. A cool breeze rustled the leaves, carrying a scent of rain and something else, something metallic and old. He found her standing, not sitting, staring up at the first star to prick the velvet sky. He walked up beside her, his heart aching with a feeling he could no longer deny. "Maya," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what's going on or why you're here, but I have to tell you." He faltered, searching for the right words. "I'm not just here for a story anymore. I'm here for you." She turned to him, and for the first time he saw not just sorrow in her eyes, but fear. A tear traced a path down her cheek. "You can't be, Daniel. You have to leave this place. Tonight." "Leave? Why?" "I'm not leaving you here alone," he insisted, reaching to touch her arm. His fingers met nothing but cold air. He recoiled, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. He could see her standing right there, beautiful and solid, but his hand had passed through her as if she were a projection of light. "What was that?" he stammered, his blood turning to ice. Maya's composure finally broke. Her body trembled, and a sob escaped her lips. "Because I'm not really here," she wept, the words tearing from her. "I'm not alive, Daniel." The world tilted. The peaceful clearing suddenly felt like a cage. The beautiful golden light seemed sinister. "That's not possible," he whispered, shaking his head in denial. "I've been talking to you for a week. I can see you." "You can see what's left of me," she corrected, her voice hollow with years of resignation. "Years ago, I was taken, like the others." She gestured vaguely to the oppressive forest beyond their sanctuary. "There's something in this forest, an ancient presence. It doesn't kill you, not completely. It feeds on youth, on life, and it traps you here, caught between worlds, until another soul takes your place." The local whispers, the stories of the disappeared girls, the publisher's strange insistence on true events, it all crashed down on him. He was standing in the heart of the horror story he'd been sent to find. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw it all. The translucence he'd mistaken for ethereal beauty, the stillness he'd mistaken for peace, the profound, unending sorrow of a prisoner. The girl he was falling in love with was a ghost, bound to this terrible, hungry place. And he, a desperate young writer, had walked right into her cage. The forest no longer whispered, it held its breath. After Maya's confession, the silence that pressed in on Daniel's small cabin was a physical weight, a solid thing that muffled sound and thought. Every creak of the floorboards was an accusation. Every shadow that danced in the lamplight was a long, skeletal finger pointing at him. He was no longer a writer seeking a story. He was a man who had fallen in love with a ghost, and the forest, their shared tomb, was watching. He couldn't leave her. The thought was a non-starter, an impossibility his heart refused to compute. Leaving would be a betrayal worse than death, a hollowing out of his own soul. Hope, desperate and irrational, became his only fuel. He tore through the meager collection of books he'd brought with him, his writer's curiosity now a frantic life-or-death investigation. He turned his laptop into a portal, battling the forest's intermittent signal to dive into digital archives, obscure academic journals, and forgotten forums discussing the folklore of the Eastern Cape. His cabin became a whirlwind of paper and desperation. Coffee went cold in half-empty mugs. Pages of local history were marked up with frantic red ink. He barely slept, his dreams filled with images of Maya's face, beautiful and sad, fading behind a curtain of tangled roots. The story he had come to write was forgotten, replaced by a singular, obsessive question. How do you free a soul from the earth that has claimed it? He found fragments, whispers of a truth scattered across decades of text. An anthropologist's thesis from the 70s spoke of an animistic presence in the Tsitsikama, a root mine that governed the life and death within its borders. A settler's diary from the 19th century described it as a jealous entity, one that covets the bloom of youth and despises the decay of age. The disappearances were never random. They were always the young, the vibrant, those with their lives stretching out before them like an unopened book. At dusk, he would go to the clearing, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fading light. Maya would be there, waiting. The easy, hopeful energy of their first meetings was gone, replaced by a shared, tragic intimacy. "You look tired, Daniel," she said one evening, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. She seemed more translucent than before, as if his frantic search was somehow draining her. "I haven't been sleeping," he admitted, his gaze fixed on her. "I'm close to something, Maya. I can feel it." A profound sadness filled her eyes. "There is nothing to find. This place doesn't let go. It only trades. It demands balance. Please, you have to leave, before it decides it wants you too." "It's too late for that," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "It already has me." The breakthrough came late one night, buried in a footnote of a scanned, out-of-print book on Xhosa spiritualism. The text was dense, but one sentence seized him. It spoke of the forest as a weaver, eternally mending the tapestry of its own existence. When a thread was broken, a life taken, it could not be rewoven, but it could be replaced. SHSH for umfafumlo, the text read. A soul for a soul. But a crucial line followed, a chilling addendum he had to read 3 times to believe. The new thread must be of the same weave, the sapling for the sapling. The old wood cannot replace the new bloom. The blood drained from his face. The room went cold. A soul for a soul, but only a young one could be traded. An older person, someone past the peak of their life, was of no use to the forest. The entity didn't want experience or wisdom. It wanted potential. It wanted the years that had yet to be lived. He looked at his own reflection in the dark laptop screen. He was 28, full of unrealized dreams, a life not yet fully lived, a writer whose best stories were still inside him. He was a new bloom. He was the perfect price. The horror of it was a cold, sharp blade twisting in his gut. This wasn't a loophole. It was a trap, and he had walked right into it. Adrian Cole, the publisher, had sent him here. Had he known? The thought was a flicker of ice, but he pushed it away. It didn't matter. All that mattered was Maya. He went to the clearing the next evening with the weight of that knowledge pressing down on him. The setting sun bled orange and purple through the canopy, painting the clearing in hues of farewell. Maya was waiting, her form shimmering at the edge of the ancient yellowwood tree that marked her boundary. She saw the change in him instantly. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a heavy, solemn calm. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What did you find?" He couldn't bring himself to tell her the full truth, to place that burden upon her. "I found the ending," he said softly, his eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored her own. "The ending to my story." Her face crumpled with dread. She drifted closer, her spectral hand reaching as if to touch his cheek. "No, Daniel, no. You can't. This isn't a story. This is your life. Your one precious life. Go home, please. Live it. For me." Tears welled in his eyes, blurring her beautiful, tragic face. "What kind of life would it be?" he whispered. "Knowing you're still here? Knowing I just walked away? Some things are worth more than the years you get to live. I came here to be seen, to finally write something that mattered. Well, this matters. Don't do this, she begged, her form flickering violently. Don't choose me over yourself. I'm not, he said, a sad, resolute smile touching his lips. I'm choosing love. It's the only choice there is. The ritual, as described in the old text, was not one of blood or chanting. It was an act of will, a willing transfer. He had to go to the heart of the forest, to a place the text called the Nintilizio, the heartwood, and offer himself completely, not just his life, but his identity. He had to give the forest his name, his memories, his future, and in exchange, it would release the soul it held. He would become a forgotten thread, and she a rewoven one. That night he didn't search or write. He packed. He carefully placed his finished manuscript, the story of a ghost in a forest and the man who loved her, into a waterproof satchel addressed to Adrian Cole. He tidied the small cabin, making the bed and washing the last of the coffee cups. He looked at his reflection one last time, memorizing the face of the man he used to be. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking clarity. He walked to the door, took one last look at the small, temporary life he had lived there, and stepped out into the night. The forest was waiting, and the air was still, expectant. The balance of souls was about to be struck. The air in the clearing was thin and cold, holding the last dregs of twilight in a bruised, purple stillness. Daniel stood before the flat, moss-covered stone he had chosen as his altar, his hands steady, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had found a terrible, beautiful clarity in the last few hours. This was not an end, but a transaction, a story for a life, his story, her life. Maya flickered at the edge of the clearing, her form as translucent as smoke. Grief made her seem more a ghost than ever before. Don't do this, Daniel, please. This isn't a story. You can't write a happy ending by erasing yourself. He looked at her, his love for her a physical ache. He saw not the spectral girl trapped by a curse, but the vibrant, laughing woman she should have been. A story is all I am, Maya. For years I've tried to write one that mattered. This is the only one that does. He placed the final carved river stone in its place, completing the circle described in the tattered pages of local myth. It's not an ending. It's a release. It's a cage, she whispered, tears that could not fall shimmering in her eyes. You'll be trading one prison for another. Then I'll be the ghost in your story, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. And you'll be the one who gets to tell it. He didn't wait for another protest. He closed his eyes and began the words, a low, resonant chant that was less a language and more a vibration, a plea directed at the ancient soil beneath his feet. The unnatural silence of the forest shattered. A deep, sonorous hum rose from the ground, traveling up through the soles of his boots. The trees, which had always stood as passive witnesses, seemed to lean in, their branches weaving a dense canopy that snuffed out the remaining light. It was not darkness that fell, but a presence. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something impossibly old, like dust from crushed stars. The forest was waking. Or perhaps it had always been awake, and was only now turning its full attention upon him. He felt a profound, immeasurable consciousness focusing on him, a hunger that was not of tooth and claw, but of time and silence. It was the entity Maya had described, the landlord of this sacred, terrible place. Daniel! Maya's voice was a panicked cry, stretched thin by the suffocating pressure. He opened his eyes and looked at her one last time. He poured every ounce of his love, his regret, and his hope into that final gaze. He saw her form begin to waver violently, like a candle flame in a gale. The forest was assessing the offering. It was testing his resolve. He did not flinch. He held its gaze, this vast, unseen thing, and offered himself willingly. He was young. He was full of life and unwritten stories. He was the perfect price. The hum intensified into a roar that was felt more than heard. The ground beneath him softened, turning fluid. Green and brown tendrils of light, like luminous roots, snaked up from the earth, wrapping around his ankles, his legs. They were not violent. They were possessive, exploratory. They climbed his body, and where they touched, he felt not pain, but a slow, complete dissolution. He was being unwritten. His memories, his fears, his love for Maya, they were being drawn out, absorbed, woven into the forest's eternal tapestry. His final thought was not of himself, but of her. Be free. As he faded, she solidified. The ghostly translucence vanished, replaced by the solid warmth of flesh and bone. Color flooded her cheeks. She gasped, a true shuddering intake of air that filled her lungs with the scent of pine and decay. The spectral prison dissolved. She stumbled forward, reaching for him, but her fingers passed through only empty air and shimmering motes of light. Daniel Mokoena was gone, consumed. A whisper added to the rustling leaves. The oppressive weight lifted from the clearing. The air was just air again. The trees were just trees. Maya stood alone, the cold night air on her living skin, her heart breaking and beating, for the first time in years. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Months later, in a glass-walled office overlooking the glittering sprawl of Cape Town, Adrian Cole held a book in his hands. Its cover was stark and beautiful, a photograph of a dense, dark forest, with the title embossed in simple, elegant font, The Tsitsikama Sacrament. Below it, the author's name, Daniel Mokoena. The book was a phenomenon. It had appeared on his desk exactly as promised, a full manuscript delivered by a courier with no return address, postmarked from a small town near the forest. Adrian had published it immediately. The critics were rapturous, praising its haunting realism, its masterful blend of folklore and psychological horror. They called Mokoena a once-in-a-generation talent, a voice that had emerged from nowhere to write the definitive South African ghost story. Then, just as quickly, he had vanished, adding to his own myth. No one could find him. Adrian ran a hand over the cover, his thumb tracing the author's name, a success that tasted of ash. He walked to the wide window, the city lights a galaxy of indifferent stars below. He had told himself it was the only way. For years after his daughter Maya Cole had disappeared on that hiking trip, he had pursued every rational lead. When those failed, he had turned to the irrational, the whispers and myths the locals spoke of in hushed tones. He had learned the terrible truth of the forest. He had learned the rule. A soul for a soul. Young for young. The knowledge had been its own prison. He was too old. The forest would not accept him. He could stand at the edge of that clearing for 1,000 years, and the entity would not stir for him. It wanted youth, potential, a life not yet fully lived. And so he had begun his own monstrous hunt. He needed an offering. Not a victim, he reasoned, but a volunteer. Someone who would walk into the woods of their own free will. Someone desperate enough for a story that they would risk becoming one. He had spent years searching for the right candidate, scanning literary magazines, querying slush piles, looking for that specific blend of talent, ambition, and despair. Then he found Daniel Mokoena, a young writer in Johannesburg, brilliant but unseen, on the verge of giving up. The perfect choice. The phone call, the generous offer, the carefully planted suggestion of the Tsitsikama. Every step was a move in a game only he understood. He had orchestrated a perfect tragedy. From his desk, he picked up a silver frame. In it, a photograph of him, younger, his arm around a smiling, vibrant teenage girl with bright, hopeful eyes. His Maya. A door opened behind him. "Dad?" The voice was soft, real. He turned. Maya stood there wrapped in a warm sweater, holding 2 mugs of tea. She was alive. She was home. She was free. The grief for the man who had saved her was a quiet shadow in her eyes, but she was healing. "I'm here," Adrian said, his own voice thick with a truth she would never know. He had done it. He had sacrificed a stranger to save his daughter. He had found his ghostwriter in every sense of the word, and Daniel Mokoena had delivered the masterpiece that had bought her life. But there was no relief waiting for him, no sense of something restored. Only a heavier silence. The book in his hand felt less like a triumph and more like a shifted burden, and the photograph in the other no longer brought comfort, only a question he could not escape. It was done, yes, but nothing felt saved, only shifted, only carried.